So what we're going to do now is where the buyer was using a contract to control the vendor. We're going to, next, we're going to tell the vendor to write the contract to tell the buyer what they're going to do. Does this make sense to everybody? Okay. Now, how does this work? If the vendor is going to be an expert, should the vendor make the scope larger or smaller? Smaller. Because the smaller they make it, the more assurance that they have no risk. Does everybody understand that? The larger they make the scope, the more chances that they have risk in there. Okay? Everybody understand that idea? Now, why will the buyer hire a vendor who makes his scope smaller? Okay, look. As the vendor is an expert and makes their scope smaller, they will then identify everything that's a risk for them to finish their scope, and they will identify it outside of their scope. And then what they'll do is they'll try to mitigate that risk, but if it happens, the buyer must pay for it. So who has all the risk? The buyer. And the vendor he hires has how much risk? No risk, as long as he hires a what? A good vendor, an expert. Okay. So this is what I want you to do now, because I notice that some of your minds are getting a little sleepy. I want you to tell me, number one, why will a buyer hire a vendor who makes his scope smaller? And why will a buyer hire a vendor who identifies all the risk and then tells the buyer he's going to pay for it? Okay, the reason why a buyer would buy from a vendor who said, this is all I'm going to do, and the vendor identifies all the risk and says, I will identify it and help you mitigate it, but if it happens, you pay for it, Mr. Buyer. This is all we're responsible for here, is our scope. The reason why a buyer would do that is because by observation, when we hire experts, the cost goes which way? And the quality goes which way? That's the answer. Right?